All right, so this little video is going to be a little bit longer, maybe not more longer than most videos, but we're going to talk about something that we're pretty much right in the middle of, and hopefully my experiences that I've had, you'll be able to add to yours, and it'll help you do a little bit better when you get on the water. We're going to talk about cold water fishing in general, okay? But we're going to gear it directly around crankbaits. And the reason we're going to gear it around crankbaits is because an open hook in this cold water is a whole lot easier to fish, but it does have its limitations. Okay. Cold water we're going to define as 40 degrees or less. At 32, the water's froze. So you're looking at usually 35, 36, somewhere in there, okay? First off, we're going to talk about locations. What's some of the best locations to usually find bass? We're not talking about when they get close to the spawn. We're talking about right now in the dead of winter. Where usually are they at? What are usually they doing? How can you even get near them? Things that way. So you hear people talking a lot about channel swings. So I'm going to include right here a picture first of just a regular little small pocket. This is at Lake Cumberland. And you can kind of see, but you can barely see, there's a literal channel, okay, that goes up against the bank, and it actually comes across two little small points, okay? Two basic little points coming out of this pocket. And then it kind of rides down a little bit, it goes across the bluff wall, and then it kind of veers back towards the lake. It kind of goes back towards the middle of the lake. Okay, now I'm going to show you a picture of that channel with a red line through it so that you can clearly see where the channel, that older channel literally is on the lake and how it swings up close to the bank. That is what we're talking about when we talk about a channel swing. Now, there's a lot of different parts to this, okay? The point that you're on sometimes makes a big difference how bass group there. There needs to be a shallow area with a little bit of gravel, and there needs to be a place close to that, and the closer they are together, the better, that literally almost like a bluff or tapers pretty quickly. Okay? The reason for that is, and these areas kind of need to be a little bit out of, because that channel is going to have a little bit more current, okay? But that channel also is going to be where a lot of food comes by. So a lot of reasons, the reason why this channel is there, not only are they going to later on probably take that channel and use it as a road to go where they usually spawn, to migrate there, but they're also going to use that as a food source, because that channel, shad and bait fish and stuff, a lot of times that current is going to push a lot of things in front of them, which is basically going to bring food to them. So they're going to be fairly close to it. Now the shad is going to do exactly the same thing as kind of the bass do. That's why the bass do what they do, is they're going to ride that channel, but then they're going to find little pockets and places that they can kind of get out of the wind, get out of the current. And that's where this little pocket is one of those. This is one of the other day when we went fishing, these were the areas that I was looking for. And we only had 3 bites all day. Water temperature was 41 to 42. We only had 3 bites all day. Okay, but all 3 of those bites were in locations that were very similar to this. So this is how you get your percentage of what you're going to be able to do, or how you're going to be able to catch fish a little bit higher, because you have to gradually look for these places. And it's something that I've learned over the last couple of years. These are the areas, and this applies to any lake. It applies to your little local lakes. It applies to bigger lakes. The difference in a smaller lake is it's easier to find because the lake is smaller, of course. In a big lake like Lake Cumberland, they don't have as many places. They have more places to hide, okay? So therefore, they have more places to get away from you, so it's harder to catch them. So what do we do then? What's the kind of baits that we like to use? Well, this is where it applies to where, personally, during the wintertime, the reason I went to Lake Cumberland the other day was because it was the only lake that wasn't frozen. I hadn't been in a month. I was like, I'd just like to go somewhere, run the boat, and maybe get a chance to catch a fish. Which a good friend of mine went with me, and he had 3 bites, and he caught a fish. So he caught his first fish of 2025, which was a blessing to me as well. So one of the things that I'll do over this next couple of weeks, Lord willing, is I'll fish a lot of these smaller lakes once they thaw out around here. And you said, well, why wouldn't you just go back? You know, you had those 3 bites over there. I said, well, because as far as being productive, here's what you got to understand. Remember what I told you about a smaller lake. A smaller lake, bass are easier to find. You say, well, and that sounds kind of silly sometimes, because you think, man, I've been fishing in a small lake sometimes for 8 hours and I can't get a bite. Well, the reason why a lot of us, and I've mentioned this before in other videos, don't get a bite when we go to the lake is because we kind of stick to our lure that we want to catch fish on. A lot of times if we'll change around and use different things, we may not catch 100 that day. But if our goal really is to figure out the fish, then we will actually use different baits until we do. So 2 of the little baits that last year in that water that was it was 38 degrees last year in this little lake that I went to. The average depth in that lake, I'm going to say, is about between 6 and 10 foot, depending on what part of the little lake you are. It's kind of a small little lake, little local lake. So the 2 baits that I caught fish on, and I'll put the link to the video where I caught these fish last year on the crankbaits. I'll put them in the comment section, and I'll pin them so that anybody that watches this video, you just go to the comments and automatically that video is going to be right there and you can watch it. But that day, everything was pointed in my favor. Now, it was in the 30s outside, and it was raining. And you say, my goodness, why would you even think about going when it's down in the lower 30s and it's raining and the water temperature is 38? Here's what you got to understand, and here's what I've learned. Rain doesn't have a season when they bite. When it rains, it doesn't matter if it's winter, spring, fall, or in the middle of summer. It doesn't matter out of the all 4 seasons. When it rains, the percentage of your chance to get a bite increases. Okay? All right, so anytime you have that rain or snow, that percentage goes up as far as your chances of catching a fish. Because the pressure, I believe is what it is, goes down. And it increases your chances. It just does. I've done it in all 3 seasons. You go out on a clear, sunny day, and I have seen it in the wintertime, to where you go out on a clear, sunny day, and yes, you'll do better. The rest of the time, you're thinking, man, I got a high bluebird day. That's pretty hard to catch a fish in, especially if the water clarity is crystal clear. So the reason I'm telling you these things is because when you go fishing, that needs to determine the baits that you're using, okay? That needs to determine. You say, well, I thought you already said we were talking about crankbaits. We are, because of the situations that I had, okay? The situations that I had on that day was a rainy day. There was a little bit of wind. It was overcast. It's cold outside. The water temperature, like I said, was 38 degrees. So what are the baits that I was using? The number one bait that I have used, and it's the only crankbait so far that I've caught anything below 40 degrees, is this little OG Tiny. Now, that's me personally. I know a lot of people have said, well, they use a Shad Rap. And here lately, I've been using, this is my first winter using it. I used it the other day at Cumberland for the first time in the winter. Well, I used it right around December a little bit, and I actually had a pretty nice spot on it, but it came off right at the boat because he kind of nipped the tail end of it. I didn't use it all day. I just used it part of the day, and that was the Black Label Little Cliffy. That Little Cliffy has a real tight wobble to it, and it has this same little type of round little bill, but this OG Tiny 4 is the only bait that I've successfully caught fish and got them in the boat and facing those 38 degree water temperatures. But in saying that, this right here has its limits, okay? That's the reason why I've been trying to use and experiment a little bit with that Little Cliffy, because the Little Cliffy on my 12-pound test that I usually throw on my bait caster, I can get that Little Cliffy down to that 5-6 foot range. And you said, well, I thought before you weren't really worried about getting baits deep. Depth, I'm getting ready to explain to you here in just a second. Okay, so if you hold on, I'll explain it to you. This little bait right here, I put it on a 10-pound test, and I was hitting that 4 to 5 foot range. I was hitting little brush piles and stuff that I knew was down in that 4 or 5 foot range. So this lake that I told you, the average, this is where it all becomes more important, okay? The lake that I told you that the average depth was 6 to 10 feet. The biggest majority of it is 5 foot or less, okay? So two of the bass that I caught, or no, one of the bass that I catch is literally on a flat that is 2 to 4 feet. So you see me working this little bait and kind of dragging it, and that's what I'm doing most of the video. I'm dragging it because that's giving this bait a go and stop retrieve, but I don't want it to float up. So I'm just barely dragging it. It's giving it just a second to move, but it's not bouncing back up, okay? What that's doing, it's giving that bass an opportunity to reach out and to grab it, okay? Kind of like you would with a jerkbait. A lot of people, if you remember, a lot of people years ago, you say throw that jerkbait out, twitch it down, let it sit for 10, 20 seconds, and then all of a sudden twitch it again. What were they doing? That's giving that bass an opportunity to come up and grab that jerkbait. But they're not throwing that thing just anywhere, okay? They're throwing that jerkbait in temperature, in depth of water. So if you have a 4 foot diving bait like this is, in order to be successful in the wintertime, I've learned you need to be no more than 8 feet with this bait. How do you say 8 feet? No more than 8 feet, because that bass isn't going to come up 15 feet to grab this bait. It's just not going to happen in the wintertime. They don't have the energy to do it, okay? So by me going on that day that it was raining, increased my chances, because now those fish were roaming a little more, actually ready to bite a little more eagerly, okay? So that increased my chance to get a bite. And 2 of the 3 fish, that's what I catch them on, is this little bait right here. But here's the problem. If I go to a stretch that's 10 foot deep, this little bait's not going to be as effective unless I throw it beside of a brush pile that is up in the 4 or 5 foot. Then I could throw this and kind of tick that, and I might get one of those bass to come out of that brush pile and grab my crankbait. Okay. And the reason I go to crankbaits is because the bites are so subtle, it'll blow your mind. We're not talking about when you throw these that all of a sudden you get that slam that you get in the spring that they just double your rod over. If you're around smallmouth, yeah, they'll load up on it. But if you're around spotted bass or you're around largemouth, they're not going to just slam your bait most of the time, okay? They're going to slowly come up and grab it, and all of a sudden you're going to feel pressure. A lot of times you're just going to feel weight. You're going to not feel the vibration, and that's something else to cover. Okay, I remembered the other day, for the last couple trips that I've been in, because it's been cold, down in the 30s outside, I've been throwing that 12-pound fluorocarbon, and as I've been throwing it, I'm like, man, I've gotten more backlashes than I've had in all year long. And I'm like, what's the deal? Why? I was messing with the reel and everything, and the other day, when I threw that little cliffy off the end of my rod, I remembered shortly after I did that, I was like, you know what? I never did change my line over for fishing this colder water. And the reason you want to change your line over to either monofilament or copolymer, I wouldn't change all my reels, but I would change just a couple of them so that you can experiment with it and you can see. Fluorocarbon does stretch a little bit depending on what brand you get, but it doesn't stretch very much. It's already a pretty stiff line. That's the reason why it becomes so sensitive when you're using your dragging baits and things that way. That's the reason why when you do use it as a crankbait, you can feel so good, everything bouncing around. It doesn't have as much strength. The line's denser, okay? So monofilament or copolymer are naturally stretchy, okay? It's just the way they're made. They are stretchy. Now, you can buy different brands. They're a little bit tougher than others, but for the most part, what they're made of is kind of stretchy. In the cold, just how cold is, it draws things tighter, okay? As things get colder, it makes them tougher, makes them denser. Fluorocarbon becomes almost like a wire, okay? Depending on, and especially in that 40-degree water, 30 degrees outside, if you've ever had ice on your guides, things that way. It becomes super, almost to the point if you have ice in your guides, you gotta think about this, okay? We're real careful with our knots with fluorocarbon so that we don't burn the fluorocarbon, right? We're real careful with fluorocarbon when we're tightening our knots and pulling it together. Why? Because we don't want that knot sliding down the line because it'll burn and then all of a sudden you can just snap that fluorocarbon, right? Well, the same applies to cold. Cold, when you're sitting there reeling and that line's coming through that guide and you've got ice building up, you're basically sitting there scraping that line over and over and over and over and over again, okay? So, yes, it's good in cold water because it doesn't really get a whole lot of ice on it. But once you get down into that 30-degree temperature outside and you get to that 40-degree water, it kind of messes things up a little bit and it makes that fluorocarbon become more brittle. So I usually switch my reels over to either copolymer or monofilament. Now this time what I went back to 12-pound big game, which technically it's not a thin diameter like that 12-pound fluorocarbon, but it's what I had at the time, and I really don't want to go to 10-pound test because there are chances that I go to Cumberland, and I've caught plenty of fish in the wintertime on crankbaits on a 12-pound big game monofilament. I just have to change up a little bit. So instead of throwing a DT6, if I wanted to go a little bit deeper, I need to throw a DT8. Instead of throwing the OG Tiny, what I need to do is I need to switch over if I'm wanting depth, okay? Which I'm not always wanting depth. But if I'm wanting depth, then I need to go to something that's got a little bit longer lip. Instead of the OG Tiny 4, I may need to throw this OG Tiny 7 that they've just come out with. It's got a pretty good little action. I haven't experimented a whole lot with it because I've really been enjoying throwing the black labels. But those are kind of the thought processes that goes through my mind. That's kind of what I try to do in this cold water. One other little bait. So that day, going back to that lake to where I was doing pretty good, I'd already caught 2 fish. And you're like, well, why would you change? Well, There's another little crankbait, this Bagley balsa. It's a flat balsa, and this little crankbait right here, I've done really good in cold water before. So I had it with me that day, and it's similar color pattern, not quite as bright, but similar color pattern. So I had this one tied on. So I threw this over next to some little brushes that you'll see in one spot. And I don't think I covered that in the video, but I throw it over there and I feel something bump this. And that's just all it did. It just kind of bumped it. Well, I threw it back over there and something bumped it again. So then I decided, you know what? I'm going to put that down. I'm going to pick up this crankbait and I'm going to throw it back over there. When I threw this one back over there, the fish actually latches on and it barely grabs the hooks, but it grabs it. And therefore, I got my third fish in the boat that day with 38-degree water temperature, and I got both of them on crankbaits. And a lot of people's going to say, oh, well, you'd have caught a lot more if you'd have drug a jig. Well, I've tried that before and it hasn't worked. The reason I like these crankbaits a lot of times in that water temperature is because a lot of times they do just kind of slap at it. I've had them do the same thing with jigs. I've had them do that same thing with a lot of baits. That tight line is a bait that honestly they need to be eating. It's not something really that they're going to come up and brush and bump and get hooked. They kind of have to want to eat the bait in order to do that. Crankbaits aren't that way. Crankbaits, they don't necessarily have to be hungry. Sometimes all they're going to do is they just have to be mad at it and they'll get hooked. And that's the reason why, another reason why I've kind of gone to crankbaits in that time. Now, this crankbait here, it goes down to about 6 foot. So it goes a little bit deeper than this bait. And that may be very well why they hit this the first time I came through there and the OG Tiny was just kind of out of the way. Because the other two spots that I used this, one of them, like I said, was about 5 foot. So this was just a foot away from it. The second spot was, this right here was, it was probably 2 to 4 feet. So this is well within the range of this crankbait. The other one was kind of it's not really a bluff wall, but it is a deeper wall with water or deep water close to it. It's probably one of the deepest parts of the little lake that I go to. It's probably about 18 to 20 feet on that little stretch. There's like a big ditch right there. It's next to the dam area. So it's kind of a 5 to 6 foot and then it drops off and there's a couple trees over there. That's where this little bait right here came in handy because it was getting a little deeper. I didn't take the brush with it. I didn't take the ground with it. I just threw it parallel to it and it came up and grabbed it. All right, so here's one of the things, maybe this will explain it a little bit. So this has a very tight action, okay? Very unique little tight wobble in it. Just like a little shad wrap, something that way. It has a very tight little action. So the challenge becomes getting this tight action down to the depth that the fish are at. That's what becomes so much challenge. That is why your front-facing sonar is so deadly, because you can actually get that tight little subtle action all the way down to whatever depth you want, and you can physically visualize it on the screen, how deep you are, where you're at, and position it directly in front of that fish. That is what makes that where a lot of people are going to say either it's unfair or they're going to say that it's talent, okay? It doesn't make a difference to me. When I go fishing, I'm not competing against everybody else. I'm not trying to outfish the guy down the road. I'm not trying to catch more bass than the next guy. I'm just trying to catch fish myself, okay? I'm just trying to enjoy the day. I'm just trying to be thankful for whatever I catch. So to me, the challenge to me becomes, okay, so how do I get a bait like this down just a little bit deeper? Because like I told you, I'm fishing 10 foot or less. How do I get it deeper and still keep that action? This little bait here is an OG Tiny 4. They're making OG Tiny 7. If you tie this bait on and you tie the 7 on, they both have different action, because as soon as you put the different lip, as soon as you put a different weight, it changes the action. Very good example of this is a DT6 and a DT8 and a DT10. And you say, well, a DT6 and DT10 have completely different bodies, so of course they're going to have different action. But then you have the DT8, which actually has the body of a DT6. But the bill is different. What does it do? It tightens the action. It doesn't make it wider, it tightens the action. So it actually becomes more subtle as it goes down. So that DT8 becomes, in some situations, a little deadlier, but in other situations it becomes not, because now I don't have the same vibration. So in dirtier water, maybe I don't get as many bites, maybe I get more, I don't know, but I can't really. It's very hard, and I hope I'm explaining this right, and you're where you're understanding it. It's very hard to get the exact action that this bait has and get it down to that 7-8 feet range. Because in order to get it down to that range, as you add weight, add a bill, it changes the action. It just does. It changes how that water flow comes over that bait. Okay, so that is where the challenge comes in of using different styles of crankbaits and using different things. That is why even me, throwing that little Cliffy, throwing the Slim, throwing even the Rapala Slim, you throw in these little baits, you're trying to get a different little action. You look at the Rapala Slim is a bigger crankbait, but when you throw it out there and you reel it, it has a tight action too, a lot like the OG Tiny does. It has a very subtle wobble. It's a bigger profile, so it's pushing more water, but it has a very subtle movement. This little bait right here, if you throw it on a 5 to 6 gear ratio reel with about 12-pound either fluorocarbon or monofilament, it has a very slow back and forth action. So, but it's only going to go to that 6 foot. If you put smaller diameter line on it, you're going to get maybe another foot out of it if you can throw it a little bit further. But to get it 5 more feet down, you say, well, it'd be easy. All you do is put a longer lip. As soon as you put that longer lip or different design lip, it would change the action completely. So maybe that explains it just a little bit. So the reason that I'm mentioning these things is, in my opinion, in the wintertime, the best place to get a bite is the places that I know that is better to get a bite is shallower lakes. Shallower lakes are easier to find the fish. Shallower lakes, they have more areas that have that depth range, because here's the problem. The problem is like when I went the other day to Lake Cumberland and I went to go fishing, the main lake, you're talking about 40 to 70 feet in a lot of areas, okay? A lot of people wonder why this sonar, front-facing sonar, has done so good. I know exactly why it's done so good. Number one, you can watch what you're doing and watch the fish. You can literally put the bait right in front of their face. The other difference is you can sit there and hover it in front of their face, which means not only are you, sometimes you're dealing with a feeding response, but more than likely you're dealing with an aggravating response. So you're getting a reaction out of that fish. And what is their normal one reaction is to eat the bait in front of them, okay? If it's bothering them that much, then they're just gonna eat it. I've seen them grab bluegill, swim just a few feet, spit it out, okay? Because they didn't want to eat the bluegill, but they wanted it out of the area of their beds. So a lot of times that's what happens. And the reason why I'm telling you that sometimes different baits, we wind up getting them to where they work better, is because they're actually getting to the level of where the bass's comfort zone is. That's the whole purpose. So you're trying to get the bait down to where they're wanting to eat it. And you say, well, most of the time you say that you fish 10 feet or less. And yes, I do. Because in my opinion, most bass that are going to be feeding are 10 foot or less. If they're hunting around For crawdads and things that way, that's a whole different issue. But most fish that are 10 foot or shallower, they're fairly easy to catch. Fish that are going below that, they're a lot more difficult to catch unless you find a group of them, and that's not easy to do, especially on a bigger lake. So in a smaller body of water, it's just easier to find those bass. It's easier to find more areas that have that shallow water. A place like Lake Cumberland becomes a real challenge because, like the water the other day when I went there, some of those back coves had just started thawing out the last couple of days. So the main lake was 41 to 42 degrees. When I was going in the back of those creeks, I could see that water gauge or that temperature gauge on my front console. It was dropping to 40, 39, 38 as I went back in there, and I knew there's no point going back in there to that real shallow water. Now, I did find a couple main creeks that when I went back into so far, I would see shad all over the place, okay? And that water temperature was 41 to 42, but it was also 20 foot deep where I was at. So they were longer, bigger creeks to where that frozen had happened all the way in the back. So where I was at, it hadn't been. But the problem is that water temperature, bass right now aren't going to run into and go looking for colder water. I fished a couple run-ins and kind of looked at the temperature there, and in the run-ins, that temperature was about the same as the main lake. Now, they weren't pouring run-ins, but they were little waterfalls and little things that they had all kinds of brush, all kinds of things with them. You could also see in those areas little bitty shad floating here and there, okay? Not as many as I found in a couple of the creeks, but these are areas that on a bigger lake, you're like, well, man, how come you didn't, get a bunch of these fish and hook up with them? And it's like, well, here's the reason. The reason is those fish can back up to 40 feet of water. Those fish can suspend out in 25 foot over 40 foot of water and stay there for a little bit, and they're comfortable. They can go all the way down to the bottom and settle in 30, 40 foot of water, and they're fine. They've got thousands and thousands of acres worth of areas, and it's just a matter of pulling up on that spot that may have 25 of them. It's kind of hard to find. It's really like finding a needle in a haystack. But when you go to a small lake, you can develop a pattern fairly quickly, and then usually wherever you caught them last year on a small lake, they're going to be in the same little areas this time. It's just a matter of rotating through baits, which I even tried on that bigger lake, and it didn't work the other day. As you fish it more, you narrow down more and more what they're doing and where they're at. But that's a whole lot of different fishing. But anyway, I figured I'd give you, I know this is a lot of information. I know a lot of you are going to have a lot of questions. I don't know that I have the answer to them, but this is just experiences that I've had. This is just the way that I've been able to deal with going in the cold water, because let's be honest, a lot of people think it's even crazy to try to go out in the cold. But if you're like me, I don't have every day to go fishing. I like going when I have the opportunity, and sometimes that's a week or two. Here lately, I've had a lot of challenges. Right before Christmas, in the month of December, they found out that I went to the doctor. I had a little spot on my side. They found out that little spot needed to be cut out, was their suggestion, because it had cancer in it. And it was supposed to be about a quarter, and after they got to cutting, it was about the size of a chocolate chip cookie that they cut out. As far as I know, they got everything. That's what the doctors told me. So we thank the good Lord for another day, and we try to take advantage as best we can. So not only did I go through a pretty big recovery process, just because after they cut that out, I have about a 4 or 5 inch scar now right under my chest. I've had to deal with getting older on top of it all, and all the lakes were frozen and everything else, so I've been patiently waiting. That's why the other day, to be honest with you, it was just a blessing just to go out. And it was even more of a blessing to be able to take a good friend with me and see him catch his first fish of the year. And it got to be a Lake Cumberland smallmouth, which was even a bigger blessing. So then I decided, you know what, I'm going to take the time to make this little video about cold water crankbaits, because a lot of people talk about a lot of different things, but I try my best to give you honest, true information, because I know a lot of you are just like me. You know, I still have a job. I still have family that I help and I pick up and I take care and do things with. I still have my kids that I try to help. I still have responsibilities, and I probably don't do, I'm sure my wife would say this, that I probably don't do as many little house chores as I should do around the house. But there's always something in life going to come up, and that's kind of the way I've treated this little surgery I went through. Something in life's always going to come up. So you really have to get used to thanking the Lord for every day, really appreciating everything the Lord allows you to do and blesses you with. And you really have to try to take advantage of when the opportunities you can go. And that hopefully is something that I know for a fact, a lot of times I get to go a lot more than a lot of you. And I know that that's a blessing that the Lord has given me, and I'm very thankful for it. So that's why I'm hoping that the time that I take to make these little videos is beneficial to you all, because not only does it bless me to see you all be successful and message me and the friendships I've developed, but I'm hoping that the time is you all can, when you all get ready to have those once a month, once every 2 weeks that you get to go, some of you not only get to go on the weekends, that you're able to narrow down a little bit quicker what you need to do in order for you to be successful. And let's be honest, we all love to go out. We wouldn't be doing it if we didn't. We love to go out. We see the Lord's creation. We see the wonderful lakes. We see all the beautiful scenery. But it is a nice little bonus to be able to catch a few fish and enjoy that fun time and make all those memories together. So enough rambling on, but I am getting my strength back little by little. Like I said, I was blessed to go the other day. Everything ran nice. It was kind of neat. It'll probably be a little bit before I go back that far. I'll probably go to a couple little local lakes that I know of, and little by little, and hopefully the Lord will bless me there. I haven't caught my first fish of 2025 yet, but it's okay. I caught so many fish in 2024 that I can honestly say, and praise the Lord Jesus for it, there was only one day in all of 2024 that I went fishing that I didn't catch a bass. So I can't really complain in 2025 if it takes me a few trips before I start getting a little pattern down. That's up to the good Lord to bless me. But hopefully these little tips will help you. Anybody have any questions, any comments? If you have ideas that you think, hey, I know you said that works for you. This is something that I've tried in 40, 50 degree water. If you want to post little comments of baits you use and stuff, that's fine with me. I know a lot of you throw the shad reps. I know a lot of you throw all kinds of other little baits in the wintertime. I know some of you spend the money and all you do is pretty much go out and use the front-facing sonar. And if that's what you want to do, then that's what you do. I like doing it this way. I don't really want to spend all the money on a front-facing sonar unit. I think I spend enough on fishing as it is. I enjoy the challenge of going out and figuring them out. So that's the reason why I don't. But anyway, God bless you all. Hope this helps you. Don't forget, if you want to watch that little video about cold water, those crankbaits in 38 degree water, I'm going to put it in the comments and pin it so it'll be there at the top anytime anybody looks for it. Thank you everybody that subscribes. Thank you everybody that shares the videos. Thank you everybody that just sometimes just comments just to check on me. Sometimes comments just because they have questions. I really enjoy all the friendships that we have and the conversations back and forth. Don't forget, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a good day.